Celeste is a game about struggle. It was built as an homage to platformers past, where challenge and precision were the name of the game. That's a factor that many caught on to straight away, with the escalation of difficulty and technical skill required to beat Celeste appearing, for many, to be above the curve. Through the story of a young woman climbing a mountain, the team at Extremely OK Games crafted an adventure that made it clear that beating it would not be easy. It is a game about struggle. Yet the inverse of struggle, and for some the result, is relief. When you reach the end of a long journey, you feel relieved that the struggle is behind you. Whether it's something as mundane as a video game level, or as critical as a personal issue that's affected you for a long time, we seek relief after we set out on a difficult path. Often, a struggle brings us pain, aggravation, sadness, or suffering that causes us to be harsher on ourselves, or others, and we chase anything that seems like it could grant the remote possibility of letting it go. But what about the struggles that never end? What about the problems that plague us for years and years and never go away? What about the problems that resurface when things get rough, even after you've addressed the issue? That's the core emotional conflict of Celeste, a deep personal journey of unearthing and vanquishing the struggle within yourself. In order to find that sense of peace, you must first conquer everything the mountain has in store for you. It is not an intrinsically hostile trek, but one that draws out the battles within you to help you find resolve. And as the young woman Madeline learns, the road to reconciliation is full of twists, turns, bumps, hurdles, failures, and eventually, triumphs. They say the journey of 1,000 miles begins with the first step, and Madeline's first steps are not very encouraging. All we know about her when we begin the game is that her goal is to climb Celeste Mountain and that she doesn't react well to adversity. When Granny suggests that she may not like what she finds up there, Madeline immediately gets on her case, responding that the old lady should get some help. This prologue is brief, lasting only a minute, but it gives us an insight into what Madeline is dealing with and where some of her issues lie. Right away, we see how quick Madeline is to point out others' problems, a way of pushing the critical eye away from herself and onto another element. She will be forced to look at herself later on, but for now, we can only make initial assessments. Madeline starts out very pushy, trying to defeat a problem by ignoring it or setting it aside. As someone who deals with anxiety, it's in her nature to avoid confrontation, to just try to move on when things get heated rather than resolve the dispute. And when it inevitably bubbles over, she handles the situation with less grace and poise than is warranted. The other hurdle presented to her is a more literal one, the first leap towards the mountain's base where she learns how to dash. This doubles as a tutorial for the player and a shock to Madeline's system, as if she's uncovered a power she didn't realize was inside her. It's only at this point that she starts to believe that she even has a chance to do what she came here to do. Compare the dialogue in the prologue before this moment and after this moment. Before you gain control, we hear her say, "This is it, Madeline. Just breathe. Why are you so nervous?" Knowing that she can't put this off any longer, she attempts to shake off her anxiety rapidly, shoving it off in her mind so she can focus. Then, after she's gained the dash and started the trek upwards, she simply says, "You can do this." It's a more positive framing, a way by which Madeline finally begins to understand that overcoming this obstacle is doable. She can do this. That's an important first lesson when faced with inner adversity. Prevailing is possible, and you will become stronger should you come to terms with the demons that haunt you. In the end, though, words are simply words. A positive attitude is one thing, and it is no doubt essential to moving on. What's more imperative, however, is finding the strength to persevere. While the crux of Celeste's depiction of fighting anxiety is in its story, there's also something to be said about how the player overcomes a test of their own. You're presented with a series of rooms in each level, mainly consisting of linear challenges, but occasionally branching out to a more open or maze-like design. The path forward is always clear, but sometimes the way up the mountain involves retracing your steps or doubling back to explore every single path. Just as frequently though, you reach an area where you can't go back, where the only way to continue is to keep pushing onward. It's simple stuff in principle, but the way Celeste shapes and reveals its mechanics ties in with the game's theme of discovering what you're capable of. The game is built on the idea of constantly pushing expected boundaries rather than building new ones entirely. Not actual boundaries, of course, but the game shows you how much you can achieve through a relatively bare-bones moveset. All Madeline can do is jump, climb, and dash, and that's all you need to conquer everything the game throws your way. You understand your capabilities right from the start, and as a player, you have the tools and knowledge to make it to the end. It's just a matter of figuring out what the game wants you to do. And yes, the seasides and farewell require you to learn more advanced movement, but it's all done through the systems established from the beginning. The only thing stopping you from wave dashing is not knowing how to do it. Now, helping the player discover the true gameplay potential is nothing new. Games have been doing it since real-time action became a standard element. Yet it also functions as a tactile representation of Celeste's attitude towards success and failure. We'll talk about this more later, but let's examine it from one angle in particular: how the game handles death. Despite its reputation as a hard platformer, Celeste never, ever makes you feel discouraged. One of the first things the game teaches you is that even if you aren't immediately successful, it's okay to pick yourself up and try again. While later stages, and especially the extra stages, get away from this, initially Celeste's rooms are fairly short. Since you respawn at the beginning of your current screen if you fall, you never feel too disheartened to give it another shot. Dying is not a punishment in Celeste, instead it's just a temporary setback, another hazard to overcome, but one that's well within your capabilities as a player. That's all out of universe, however. As for Madeline, the danger is very real. Even the first level has tons of bottomless pits, spikes, and dangerous surfaces in the way, and she has to get through each and every one. She has the confidence to see it through though, and as she later reveals, this kind of hike is what she was looking for. Perhaps what makes the Forsaken City level so interesting as the first stage is how it depicts abandonment, as it's a perfect analogy for what Madeline is feeling at the beginning of the game. You're climbing through the ruins of a deserted city, a visual representation of destruction, symbolizing the inner turmoil of Madeline's soul. Her anxiety causes her to imagine the worst outcomes for everything, which is mirrored in how everything in the level is broken and in disrepair. She comments later that the people who founded this city built it for no reason, focusing on the negative outcome in hindsight rather than taking a holistic view. Contrast that with Theo's response, where he's grateful that he can enjoy what's left. He understands that what's done is done and wants to find joy in everything that remains. Speaking of Theo, Madeline meets him early on, and it's apparent right away just how different the two are. His carefree, let life unfold as it may attitude runs opposite of Madeline's tendency to worry about what's happening. As a photographer, Theo has to pay attention to what's there now. It's his job to document the present, or at least a snapshot of the present as it is at any given time. But it also allows him to see the beauty in everything, to look at a broken city like this and say, yes, this is sad, but this is what it is, let's acknowledge it and move on. Theo is a big anchor in Madeline's climb, seeing Madeline's commitment to reaching the summit and encouraging her to go for it. As he'd put it, you only live once. The irony of Theo's statement hits you as soon as you finish the first chapter when you come across the Celeste Memorial, dedicated to the lives of everyone who perished trying to climb the mountain. On its own, it's a nice little acknowledgement of the perils of an adventure like this, and a way to remember those who came before you. It's also a grim reminder of how much you put on the line when daring to push yourself to the limit. For Madeline, that's true in both the physical and mental senses. Mountain climbing is dangerous, no question about it, but it also represents, in some ways, a purposeful assault on Madeline's mind. She's out here trying to find something missing from her, or so she says, a fixation on an entirely self-serving task. To drill down on this, let's look at why she decided that climbing a mountain was the answer to her problems. This is tough to determine because we know next to nothing about Madeline's past before the events of Celeste. We know next to nothing about Madeline's past. If there was a specific inciting incident that caused her to come out here, we don't know what that is. Besides a brief conversation with her mother, it's unknown what family or friends she has that she might be in conflict with. We can gather that Madeline has some long-standing issues, and perhaps it's affecting her relationships with others, or has just been bothering her as of late, so she took the journey out to Celeste Mountain to see if she could climb it. There's a lot to unpack in Madeline's mental and emotional state throughout the game. We've already talked a bit about her anxiety and wavering belief in herself, and the mountain will make sure that she comes face to face with those problems. Literally in this case, as during her exploration of the old site, she releases a part of her that is, in essence, the negative side of Madeline given form. We first see her in a mirror, suggesting that this is what Madeline sees when she thinks of herself, a controlling, dismissive, and antagonistic force, or so we think at first. The part of her represents Madeline's self-doubt, the fear of not knowing what lies ahead and that it might harm her. You can interpret this as a combination of Madeline's survival instincts and inner conflict, a physical manifestation of the darker side of the turmoil in her head. The mountain brings out the anxieties and struggles a person is dealing with, and while it's fair to assume some of Madeline's stress is caused by external situations, the part of her is written and addressed as an internal system brought to life by this place. Through this lens, that memorial isn't just honoring those who physically died on the mountain, but those who couldn't come to grips with the contrasting feelings inside of them. You'll notice that I'm not referring to the part of her as a negative force, however. While she is an antagonist in a textual sense, that's only because we see things from Madeline's point of view. Looking at her from a different angle, we can view the part of her as Madeline's common sense, her responsible side, the part of her brain that doesn't want to take unnecessary risks. That's a vital part of any person, the part that stops us from throwing ourselves needlessly into bad situations. Unfortunately, like everyone who struggles with mental health, that inner voice of reason can be harsh, condescending, or even downright poisonous, not to mention sometimes incorrect, as it's usually based on your point of reference, which is not always accurate. You can understand why Madeline doesn't want to listen to the part of her. It's not because she doesn't value the rational viewpoint, but rather that this is something that she doesn't like listening to. And by rejecting the part of her, she sets off the first of many personal trials that will test Madeline as she journeys up the mountain. There's the ghost of Mr. Oshiro, the hotel owner who has his own fears physically manifested into a harmful presence. The winds of the Golden Ridge pushing Madeline with forces beyond her control. And a confrontation with the part of her inside the Mirror Temple where the mountain amplifies the darkness inside Madeline. We don't have time to dissect every level in the game entirely, but the adversity Madeline pits herself against to reach her goal comes in more mental, less physical forms. And although it looks pretty doable at first, conquering all of this is far from easy. We've talked about the game's depiction of conflict, so let's talk about how Celeste begins the path towards resolution. For many people, that path only truly begins upon reflection, which takes us to Chapter 6, appropriately titled Reflection. This is Madeline's lowest point, literally, as it occurs right after she's fallen a great height, but mentally as well. I've already addressed her anxiety, although making a full mental health diagnosis is hard without knowing the details of her life before coming to the mountain. We can see anger, regret, and fear within her, but mental health struggles are often far more complex than we understand from looking at the surface. From examining what we know, we see that one of the causes behind her issues is an obsession with success and subsequent fear of failure. Madeline's journey up the mountain is filled with triumphs, missteps, and eventually a complete collapse as she struggles to reconcile the multiple sides of her conscience. Although they're physically separated on the mountain, these are two halves of Madeline's mind fighting with each other on the climb. When she falls after the Mirror Temple, Madeline wants to abandon everything completely, seeing herself as unworthy to continue because she's sunk so far. In this moment, she doesn't think she can reach the summit, and thus trying to get back up would be a waste of time. In many cases, failure isn't the absolute end of the world so long as you continue moving forward, yet Madeline fails to recognize this. That's because up until now, Madeline has only set her sights on one thing: accomplishment, represented by the summit. She thinks she can resolve what's bothering her by climbing the mountain, but we can also view this as a mask for an obsessive desire for success. We value success because it feels good, and others view it as a positive thing, and consequently, we detest failure because we see it as weak. Madeline is so focused on accomplishing her goal that she's dismissive of those who she thinks are getting in the way because she doesn't want that failure. We've seen how Madeline fights with positively managing conflicts, her dismissal of Granny at the beginning, her sadness at Mr. Oshiro chasing her away, and how she begs the part of her to be on her side. Madeline is not infallible, and if we were to scrutinize, there are things she could have handled better. But most of the pain she inflicts is dealt to herself, not others. Her growing self-doubt, coupled with her lack of adequate response to failure, causes her to retreat into herself and pull out a false conclusion, that in order to move onward, she has to cut out the negative side of her. You can understand why she'd think that, as the part of her has demonstrated its ferocious side already, even brazenly attempting to kill Madeline. But you also see how the part of her believes she's defending Madeline, even if her methods are extreme. But that's the key point, it's not about the extremes. We tend to focus on just the high and low points in a situation like this, both the positive peaks and negative valleys. Yet in between all of this is a balance, and to find that balance, the first step is to take a deep breath. Take a deep breath and recognize that not everything will turn out perfectly, but neither will everything fall apart. Even in the toughest of times, you can find the strength to keep going. It might be hard, but it is always possible. That's what makes the feather sequence so essential to Madeline's emotional and mental recovery, not to mention a brilliant way to show this theme of balance. When Madeline has a panic attack as their gondola stalls out, Theo teaches her a relaxation technique where she imagines a feather floating ahead of her, and she can only help it rise by calmly breathing in and out. The feather can't go too high or too low, instead, it eventually settles into the middle. It's not just an effective meditation method, it also shows how you can't lose yourself in either failure or success. Both of these results do, in a sense, accentuate and stigmatize defeat, with unchecked feelings of failure making you feel defeated, and idolizing success building an unhealthy view of defeat. After chasing the part of her and realizing that both successes and failures are bound to happen, she understands that her negative feelings can't be destroyed, but should instead be measured. Not ignored, but judged fairly. A critical part of self-care is looking at yourself at both high and low points. You need to stay calm and collected, not just having the composure to stay afloat when everything is falling around you, but also staying grounded and level-headed when things are going great. You have to push yourself to keep the feather in the air, but if you push too hard, it will disappear entirely. One success or failure does not erase the possibility of the other, and that's never going to change no matter who you are. So, embrace it. Because it's only once you embrace all the ups and downs that you begin the crucial stage of change, acceptance. Until this point, Madeline associates the part of her with rage, trauma, sadness, terror, and, as we've discussed, failure. She rejects the part of her as a problem, and since she came here to let go of her problems, she naturally wants to shut it all out. But Madeline eventually comes to terms with having to confront herself to resolve everything, and when she does, she realizes that she can't lock her regrets or fears away forever. It's only after she attempted to bottle them up, for instance, that the part of her became incredibly hostile, showing how these negative emotions can erupt if kept away for too long. But if you keep them in check, letting them out carefully and slowly, and in a healthy manner, you can live peacefully with them. The mountain dragged this out of Madeline, not to create a roadblock, but to begin the healing process. The process of coming together. The mountain as a metaphor for adversity and growth is well established by the time you reach the final area of the main game, the summit. And representing Madeline's inner conflict as a literal uphill climb is pretty brilliant, but what makes it even more fascinating is that Madeline can't accomplish her goal, at least not by herself. It's fascinating because, as I touched on earlier, mountain climbing is an inherently selfish act, or more accurately, a self-centered act. It doesn't achieve any goal except the ones you've set for yourself, and considering the danger mountain climbers put themselves in, it almost seems to an outsider like you're risking your life for no gain. This is not a put-down of climbers, mind you, it's just an examination of how little the sport of mountain climbing attains in the grand scheme of things. I mean, the summit has no intrinsic meaning, it's simply the highest point of a mountain, and you gain more from the experiences you have along the way. But more to the point, the reason you overcome personal struggles isn't to win out, it's to better yourself, to learn something new and apply it. That's why when you're challenging yourself, whether it be something important or something mundane, you need to define your own summit, your own level of difficulty. Maybe you can't reach the top, and that's okay. If you reach the goal you've set for yourself, that's all you need to do. Now that Madeline's accepted this part of herself and the two sides are working together, she feels the strength to keep going and make it to the top. But if she wanted to climb back down after reconciling, well, that'd be okay. Sometimes it's fine to push ourselves farther than we're comfortable with, but there is a limit, and that's why the game's assist mode is a perfect addition. It isn't a handicap or a performance booster, but rather a way for the player to experience what Celeste has to offer with a challenge that they can handle. It's not just inclusive, but comforting as well. But there's another element of Celeste that is an underlying theme throughout the adventure: companionship and the dangers of shutting yourself off. We feel the need to fix our own problems alone and reject outside help as we don't want to be a burden, sometimes not recognizing that our problems are the burden or that solving them requires that outside help. Madeline wants to climb the mountain herself, and if anyone gets in her way, she pushes them aside, setting her sights on a single task and never letting it go. When she settles her inner conflict, she realizes that her narrow focus prevented her from seeing the simple pleasures. And I think this is perfectly encapsulated with the collection of strawberries. It might seem like just a simple little item, but I think the choice of such a common and familiar item is strangely poignant. There's nothing grand about it, it's just a berry, a small comfort that slowly becomes an anchor as you push yourself to the limit. Living your life to the fullest means not just appreciating the high points and comforting yourself during the lows, but also accepting and enjoying the moments in between. For instance, Theo climbs to get himself out there, to explore, to observe himself in nature, to document what's there now, and also, as we learn, to remember his grandfather. There are likely some feelings inside of him that made him want to step away for a bit, but the interesting thing is, what he's taking out of it isn't focused on what he's leaving behind, but what he's gaining. Climbing the mountain is a transient thing, as are the little moments we share with each other, but they're what matters most of all. Life is full of those small little instances where not much is happening, especially when you're surrounded by the people who care about you. Huddling around a campfire, taking a picture with a friend, sharing a meal, calling someone to see how they're doing. The people who truly care about you are a vital foundation in your life, and maybe you need to spend time far away from them to realize it, but they'll be there when you return. One last detail I really love about Celeste: after you've scaled the mountain and reached the summit, the struggle isn't over. By the end of the main story, Madeline's inner conflict isn't fully resolved, but things are looking up for her relationships with others, and she at least has a goal in mind and steps that she wants to take. That's where the final chapters come in. The core doesn't have much in the way of plot, but it does represent how mental health struggles don't end once you've understood the roots of your conflicts and made peace with others. It's something that many people have to live with for the rest of their lives, and even though they can find ways to cope with the pain, you can't really get rid of it. Even once Madeline's entered the root of the mountain, not much changes in the aftermath. She feels something empty but nostalgic, and then the chapter ends. What she learned about herself is up to interpretation, but I think it's a realization that no matter how tough things get, you always have an unshakable center that defines who you are, and nothing can take that away. And then we have Farewell, a chapter that teaches Madeline perhaps the most important lesson of all: the need to let go. As the chapter begins, Madeline is mourning the loss of Granny, having missed the funeral because she was too afraid to confront her loss. It's obviously sad because a dear friend of hers has passed away, but it also shows how Madeline still has a long way to go in her emotional recovery. She may have reconciled with herself on the mountain, and in the aftermath, things were looking up for her as she seems far happier and continued to talk with Theo and Granny after leaving. However, dealing with a situation like a loved one's death can stunt mental and emotional recovery, especially if you weren't expecting it. Letting go is the hardest thing to do, and for Madeline, it's excruciating because she doesn't know how to deal with it. Sometimes we're too comfortable staying in the mindset of, I've addressed the problem and things are getting better and they should stay that way. So when new problems arise, we fall into the same cycles because we feel cheated that the good times are over. That's what Madeline goes through since she doesn't think it's fair that Granny died. Madeline wants to see her again, but she'd also rather not have to confront her death at all since it's interrupted her healing. But as I said, mental struggles are ever present, and lashing out because they flared up again is a destructive way of fixing things. It's why the part of her calls her out on how selfish she's acting, labeling the journey to follow Granny an unnecessary way to make up for missing the funeral. The tensions inside Madeline have come back, and she forgets, temporarily, what she's learned on the whole journey. We can't tie ourselves to things we've done or spend so much time absorbed in our vision of a perfect life. We should cherish the people and the moments we care about, but those people and moments are, in the end, fleeting. Life goes on, and though the good times don't always last, we can always find new ways to reconnect with them. The final scene of Madeline reaching out to Theo and discovering the connection between Granny and Theo's grandfather is touching, and it hits upon the theme of everlasting memory. People come and go, problems are born and solved, and events occur and dissipate, but memories and bonds last forever so long as you keep nourishing them. Just because people you care about may leave you for one reason or another doesn't mean your memories of them can't bring you joy anymore. You may need to let go, but you never need to forget.